Alright, let's talk about how we can set up a successful water shader on top of a plane to get some nice reflection going on. We did a quick sample scene here, throwing in some color and some lights with the HDR map for the reflection in the water. But before we start actually creating it, we gotta take a look at some reference. So this is a reference that I picked out that we can see all the little ripples that are happening in here, the scale of the ripples, the length, the way they're stretched, and how the reflection is reacting to the water surface. We have the top light getting hit according to that glancing angle of that light, and then we have shadows being cast reflecting the top light that's not reflecting the light source. And all of that comes from this subtle, let me grab a brush right here, the subtle shifts and noise in the water itself. This ripple effect is causing the reflection of the light source, and then in shadow it's reflecting the skylight or the sky. So we're trying to mimic this here in 3D. So when we looked at that reference, we can see, let's go back here real quick, we can see that we can duplicate this look with a bump. And all it is if we take a look at noise, if the noise in here is that it's just a bump map with little ripples stretched across the plane. So if we come in here, all I've done is grab a plane, basic plane. I've UV mapped it planar, so the UV map is going straight down in the Y. Oh, this thing is changed. So if we go to local, you see it's actually in the Z-axis. So we're mapping the noise straight down. That's the UV map. And all of the bump and the ripples are going to come from the shader. So let's take a look at the shader here. It's a V-Ray shader again. The diffuse color of this water is set to black, meaning there is no color. All the color is going to come from the reflection, which is reflecting the sky. Now, if this was shallower water or a murkier kind of shallow water, we get some of that brown kind of cyan hues, and we can change it to that if we like. But I want most of the color to come from the reflection. I could, just for an example here, make it a really dark, desaturated, kind of muddy color. And we can take a look at how that'll affect it. But that's just a color. Most of it is going to come from reflection. And you can see the reflection is set pretty high. And to check our reflection, we can, in the shader, we can turn on this background here to see how much it's reflecting. You can see now we can't see how reflective it is until we turn that color checkerboard. Now we see how reflective that surface is. Really reflective, the reflection glossiness that causes that softer reflection to happen for different material. Because it's super reflective, we want to keep that spec really tight, so we keep this reflection glossiness high. The subdivs and the sampling is going to be set pretty high. Standard usually comes in as 8, and you'll get some noise in your render, so you want to just crank that up to 32 samples. Cause longer render times, but you get a cleaner reflection. Now this is where all of the magic happens in the water here, the bump map. And you can see here it's set to a mix, and we can click none here and you see the mix in here. And what that's doing is saying that what we're piping into this channel, let's say the bump, it says what does the bump look like essentially. So we're going to mix black and white, because a bump map is generally a black and white. Black meaning no bump, and white being a bump, the highest bump, and any value in between is going to get a certain amount of bump in there. So from color 1 to color 2, we get to create different patterns of noise, and then that is going to be combined and put into the bump channel. So let's take a look at what we did. So it's a mix of 2 colors, and what I'm thinking when I'm doing this is, how can we create that stretched out, how can we create this pattern through noise? So we want to keep the scale low. So in the black, let's start with the white first, because this is what's going to be driving most of it. And we can double click here to take a look at the noise. You can see the scale of it is super tiny, because that's what's going to give us that big water feeling. Now if I jack this up to 5, you can see the pattern has gotten much bigger, and those ripples are going to look much bigger, like big waves, if this pattern was like that. So we want to keep it to 1, which is super tight. But just so we can see it for now, I'll crank it up. And to stretch it, we're going to do some tiling. Oops. So you can see 5 stretches it in the X. If we bring this down and we stretch it in the Y, it's going to stretch it horizontally instead of vertically, which the X was doing. So we want that longer stretch. Now this is probably stretched out too far, so we're going to go back and just get a nice kind of feeling of a wave or a ripple. So once we have our tiling set and we've stretched it out according to these axes right here, and we've set our scale to 1, and this is a trial and error. You can render and see, you know, if is it big enough, is it small enough, and really just fudge with these numbers until you get the right look. So this is where most of our bump will occur. Now to add another layer of complexity to this, we want to set the black as well. The black is going to mix with that other color, the white, and the combination of them is going to be the result. So the black is going to tell us where the ripples aren't affecting it. So the bump will not appear in these areas. And this is just what this is doing, is just breaking up the white areas so that it gives us a little bit more of a random feel, and we don't have straight lines going straight across our water. So it gives it another layer of complexity. And the same thing, it's tiled in the Y, so it's stretched out a little bit, but a little different in the X. We added a little bit more to break it up just a little, and the scale is still set to 1. So this black noise is gonna cut out from the white to create the final mix right here. So that's all it's doing, using 2 different noise to create the breakup. Let's take a look at our render again. So if we took a look, the parts that are coming up, the little waves and the breakup in the water, these are the white areas. The places where you see it flat, those are the black areas. So the noise mixing together creates this pattern. And the advantage again of doing water in 3D is that, one, it's pretty easy to set up. As you can see, nothing too complicated. It's mostly reflection and just playing around with the noise until you get the look that you want, but it's fairly easy. And I use this technique all the time, and what it does is it gives me realistic reflections, some nice breakup in that reflection, and I can put lights in there and I'll get this beautiful light reflected in the water. Now that's very hard to paint realistically. We could do it. We can grab it from a photo, we'll extract the light areas and screen it on top. But because we have all of the scene already in 3D, it's not too much to really just create a light and put it in our scene so we get some nice interactive light with the architecture we have that we modeled, but also reflect it back into the water. Tons of color and light information that we can get for free, then trying to recreate it using photos and Photoshop tricks. I think it just looks a lot better when everything's set in the scene and just works together. Now, for the map is important in the lighting because this HDR map is driving the reflection and the color that's in this water. Let's take a look at that real quick. And all that is, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get into the lighting stage next, but it's just really a dome light here, V-Ray dome light, and HDR map piped in right here, and it's set to mapping type spherical. Again, we'll jump into this lighting section, but this is where all of the color is coming from. You get this beautiful reflection again for free, whereas if you were to do this in Photoshop using photos, it's very hard to get realistic reflection of your sky down into your water and reflect your architecture into that water accurately and realistically with lights. So this is the best technique for it. And again, as you can see, it wasn't too hard to set up. It's just fine-tuning that noise, getting it looking the right way, always paying attention to photo reference, always looking at it and see how close we can get. And of course, we could have gone a lot further with our water. This is by no means the best water and the end-all be-all, but it works real well. And once we have all our buildings in here, some nice reflection with the lamp lights, trees, and some fog, we're going to be off and running. So that is all there is to water. Let's jump into the next stage.